The next morning, Hyun-woo reported to the diplomatic wing for his first official assignment. Commander Lee, a stern woman with graying hair, looked at him across her desk with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "We have a situation. With one of our diplomatic guests," she began, pulling up a holographic file. "Yuna of the Velnari delegation. She's here for the trade negotiations, but we've had complications." Hyun-woo recognized the name immediately. The woman with the companion. Commander Lee's eyebrows shot up. "You've seen it, and you're still here talking to me instead of requesting immediate transfer to another sector." It seemed harmless enough, Hyun-woo said, which made the commander stare at him like he'd grown a second head. Harmless. She turned her screen toward him, showing incident reports that scrolled on for pages. 3 diplomats have requested medical leave due to panic attacks. The Zephyrian ambassador won't come within 5 decks of her quarters. We've had to conduct all meetings via hologram from the other side of the station. And even then, 2 representatives have refused to participate. She leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "The only way we can complete these trade negotiations is if someone works with her directly, face to face, in the same room as that thing. Everyone else who's tried has lasted less than 5 minutes before running out screaming." Hyun-woo understood what she was asking. "You want me to be her liaison? I want someone who won't fall apart the moment they're in the same room together. The question is whether you're brave or just foolish." She paused. "What do you think?" The next day, Hyun-woo found himself walking toward the diplomatic quarters with a datapad full of trade agreements and a growing sense of curiosity. He'd spent the night reading everything he could find about the Velnari, though most of the files were heavily classified. What he did learn was that they were an ancient species, deeply spiritual, and that some of them formed bonds with creatures, from what the reports vaguely called adjacent dimensions. When he reached Yuna's quarters, he pressed the door chime and waited. The door slid open to reveal her standing there with obvious surprise on her face. "You came back," she said simply. "I work here now," Hyun-woo replied, holding up his data. "For trade negotiations. I'm your new liaison officer." Yuna stepped aside to let him enter, but he could see the doubt in her purple eyes. Her quarters were larger than standard diplomatic housing, probably to accommodate her companion. The space was decorated with soft fabrics and small crystals that caught and reflected light in interesting patterns. It felt peaceful, like a meditation room. The shadow creature emerged from what might have been a corner, though with the way it moved it was hard to tell where it had been waiting. Up close, Hyun-woo could see that it wasn't entirely black. Deep within its shifting form, colors moved like oil on water, creating patterns that almost looked like wings. "His name is Nabi," Yuna said softly, watching Hyun-woo's reaction carefully. "It means butterfly in the old language." Hyun-woo studied the creature, trying to see the resemblance. The way it moved did have a certain graceful quality, and those shifting colors could almost be wing patterns if you looked at them right. "Butterfly," he repeated. "I like that better than what the station crew calls him." "What do they call him?" Yuna asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "The Devourer," Hyun-woo said, then immediately regretted it when he saw her wince. They spent the morning going over trade documents, and Hyun-woo began to notice things that the holographic meetings had probably missed. When Yuna dropped her, Stylus Nabi would gently push it back toward her with a tendril of shadow. When she spread papers across the table to compare different clauses, the creature would carefully move around them, never disturbing her work. Most interesting was what happened when Yuna paused for her midday prayers. She knelt on a small mat, facing toward what must have been her homeworld's direction, and began speaking in her native language. Nabi immediately settled beside her, and its form became less active, the swirling patterns slowing to a gentle pulse. Even the lights within its depths dimmed respectfully, as if it understood the solemnity of the moment. When she finished and returned to work, Nabi made a sound that Hyun-woo had never heard before. It was like music played from very far away, or maybe like wind chimes made of crystal. The sound seemed to make Yuna smile, and she reached out to touch what might have been the creature's head. "He likes it when I'm happy," she explained, noticing Hyun-woo's curious expression. Over the following days, Hyunwoo found himself bringing small gifts. Nothing expensive or official, just interesting things he found around the station. A piece of crystallized energy from the reactor core that sparkled with its own light. A fragment of space-borne mineral that changed colors depending on the angle. Each time he offered these to Nabi, the creature would examine them carefully with senses Hyunwoo couldn't understand, and occasionally parts of its form would shimmer with new colors that had no names in any language he knew. Yuna watched these interactions with growing amazement. No one had ever treated Nabi as anything other than a monster to be feared. Watching Hyunwoo offer gifts to her oldest friend with the same casual kindness he might show to any pet was something she had never dared to hope for. "Why aren't you afraid?" she asked one afternoon as they worked through a particularly complex shipping agreement. Hyunwoo looked up from his datapad, then over at Nabi, who was currently investigating the crystallized energy with obvious fascination. "I don't know," he said honestly. "Maybe because he doesn't act like something I should be afraid of." The morning after his first encounter with Yuna, Hyunwoo sat in Commander Lee's office, listening to what sounded like an impossible request. The older woman paced behind her desk, her boots clicking against the metal floor as she explained the situation. "Every single diplomat we've assigned to work with the Velnari delegate has quit within hours," she said, pulling up holographic reports that filled the air between them. Ambassador Chen lasted exactly 12 minutes before he started hyperventilating. The Altarian representative made it through one meeting but had to be sedated afterward. Even our most experienced negotiators refused to be in the same room as that creature. Hyunwoo watched the incident reports scroll past. Medical emergencies, panic attacks, requests for immediate transfer off the station. What exactly happens to them? They see that thing and their minds just break, Commander Lee said bluntly. Grown beings who've negotiated peace treaties. Between warring worlds turn into terrified children. We've tried everything. Sedatives, psychological conditioning, even bringing in specialists who deal with xenophobic reactions. Nothing works. She stopped pacing and looked directly at him. "Which brings me to you. Security footage shows you had a conversation with her yesterday. You were standing 3 feet away from that nightmare and acting like you were discussing the weather." "It wasn't that scary," Hyunwoo said, which made the commander's eye twitch. "Lieutenant, that creature has been classified as a Class 7 psychological hazard. Just looking at it causes most sentient beings to experience what our medical staff describes as existential terror beyond normal parameters. Yet you're sitting here telling me it wasn't scary." She leaned across her desk. "I need someone to work directly with the Velnari delegate on these trade negotiations. The economic implications are enormous. We're talking about opening new shipping routes that could benefit dozens of worlds. But I can't complete the talks if every diplomat I send runs away screaming." Hyunwoo understood what she was asking. "You want me to volunteer for direct contact? I'm asking if you think you can handle it. Because if you can't, if you break down like everyone else, these negotiations fail. And failure means I have to explain to Command why a single alien and her pet managed to derail one of the most important trade agreements in recent history." 2 hours later, Hyunwoo stood outside Yuna's quarters with a datapad full of trade documents and a growing sense of curiosity rather than dread. He'd spent the time between meetings reading every file he could access about the Velnari. Most of it was heavily classified, but what he learned was fascinating. They were an ancient species that had developed alongside creatures from what the files called parallel dimensional spaces. Some Velnari formed lifelong bonds with these beings, though the reports were vague about the details. When Yuna opened her door, the surprise on her face was obvious. "You returned," she said, as if she couldn't quite believe it. "I'm your new liaison officer," Hyunwoo replied, holding up his datapad. "For the trade negotiations." Yuna stepped aside to let him enter, but he could see doubt in her purple eyes. "Others have tried," she said quietly. "They do not last long." Her quarters were much larger than standard diplomatic housing, decorated with soft fabrics in shades of blue and silver. Small crystals hung from the ceiling, casting gentle patterns of light across the walls. The space felt calm, almost meditative. Nabi emerged from what might have been a corner, though with the way it moved through space, it was hard to tell where it had been waiting. The creature approached slowly, and Hyun-woo got his first close. Look at something that had driven seasoned diplomats to nervous breakdowns. His name is Nabi, Yuna said softly, watching Hyun-woo's reaction. In the old language, it means butterfly. Hyun-woo studied the creature, trying to see the resemblance. The way it moved did have a certain flowing quality, and the colors that shifted within its dark form could almost be wing patterns. Butterfly, he repeated. That's much better than what the station crew calls him. What do they call him? She asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The Devourer, Hyun-woo said, then immediately wished he hadn't when he saw her expression. They spent the morning reviewing trade documents, and Hyun-woo began noticing details that the holographic meetings had probably missed. When Yuna accidentally knocked her stylus off the table, Nabi gently nudged it back toward her with a tendril of shadow. When she spread multiple documents across the workspace to compare different sections, the creature carefully navigated around them, never disturbing her organized chaos. The most remarkable moment came during Yuna's midday prayer ritual. She knelt on a small woven mat, facing toward what must have been her homeworld's direction, and began speaking in her native language. Nabi immediately settled beside her, and its constant movement slowed to a gentle pulse. The lights within, its form dimmed respectfully, as if it understood the sacred nature of the moment. When she finished and returned to work, Nabi made a sound unlike anything Hyun-woo had ever heard. It was like distant music played on instruments that didn't exist, or maybe like wind moving through crystal caves. The sound seemed to make Yuna genuinely happy, and she reached out to touch what might have been the creature's head. He sings when I am content, she explained, noticing Hyun-woo's fascinated expression. Over the next few days, Hyun-woo found himself bringing small offerings. Nothing official or expensive, just interesting objects he encountered around the station. A piece of crystallized energy from the reactor core that glowed with its own inner light. A fragment of space-borne mineral that shifted colors depending on the viewing angle. Each time he offered these to Nabi, the creature would examine them with senses Hyun-woo couldn't comprehend, and occasionally parts of its form would shimmer with entirely new colors that seemed to exist outside normal visual spectrum. Yuna watched these interactions with growing wonder. In her entire adult life, no one had ever treated Nabi as anything other than a monster to be feared or avoided. Seeing Hyun-woo offer gifts to her closest companion with the same casual kindness he might show any beloved pet was something she had never dared to imagine possible. The alarm started screaming at exactly 0347 hours, jolting Hyun-woo awake in his quarters. Red emergency lights bathed everything in an eerie glow as the station's automated voice echoed through the corridors. Hull breach detected. Armed hostiles aboard. All personnel report to emergency stations. Hyun-woo grabbed his uniform and rushed toward the diplomatic section. His first thought was of Yuna and whether she understood what was happening. As he ran through the corridors, he could hear weapons fire echoing from the lower decks, along with shouts in a language he didn't recognize. Corvan raiders. He'd heard about them during his military briefings. Pirates who specialized in hitting diplomatic stations and research facilities. They were known for being ruthless, well-armed, and completely without mercy. The kind of enemies who took no prisoners and left no witnesses. When he reached Yuna's quarters, he found her standing in the center of the room with Nabi coiled protectively around her. The creature's form was different than he'd ever seen it. Larger, more solid-looking, with those strange lights within its depths pulsing rapidly like a heartbeat. "Are you okay?" Hyun-woo asked, breathing hard from his sprint through the station. "They are here," Yuna said simply, and her voice carried a weight that made him pause. "The hunters, Nabi can sense them." As if responding to his name, the creature made a sound that was nothing like the gentle music Hyun-woo had grown used to. This was deeper, like the rumble of distant thunder, and it made the walls vibrate. "We need to get you to the emergency shelters," Hyun-woo said, but Yuna shook her head. "Nabi will not hide," she said. "He protects." Before Hyun-woo could ask what she meant, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a second later, casting everything in dim red light. That's when he heard the screaming start. It wasn't the kind of screaming you heard in battle, soldiers calling out orders or crying for help. This was something else entirely. pure, absolute terror that seemed to come from the very depths of the station. The sound made Hyunwoo's skin crawl, and he'd heard plenty of terrible things during his military service. Nabi's form began to change. What had been roughly the size of a large dog started expanding, flowing outward like liquid shadow. Parts of it seemed to pass right through the walls and floor, while other parts became more solid and defined. Hyunwoo watched in fascination and growing unease as the creature he'd been feeding treats to revealed itself as something far beyond his understanding. "Stay with Yuna," Nabi spoke, though not with words. The meaning appeared directly in Hyunwoo's mind, clear as if someone had whispered it in his ear. "Keep her safe." Then the creature flowed out through the wall like it was made of air, leaving only empty space where it had been. The screaming intensified. Through the thin walls, Hyunwoo could hear weapons fire, but it stopped abruptly, cut off by sounds. That didn't belong in any reality he understood. Wet noises, tearing sounds, and underneath it all, a low humming that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "What is he doing?" Hyunwoo asked Yuna, who stood perfectly still in the center of the room. "Hunting," she replied simply. Security footage later would show what happened in the corridors that night, though most of it was classified immediately after the incident. Corvan raiders, hardened killers who had terrorized merchant ships across 3 sectors, simply vanishing into writhing darkness. Their advanced weapons, plasma rifles that could punch through ship hulls, firing uselessly into shadows that shouldn't have been able to exist. The station's AI, when asked to analyze Nabi's combat performance, responded with something that had never appeared in its databases before. Error. Subject operates outside quantifiable parameters, cannot compute tactical assessment. But Hyunwoo, watching through the small window in Yuna's quarters, saw something. The security cameras missed. Every time Nabi encountered a station resident, a terrified maintenance worker hiding in an alcove, a diplomat cowering behind an overturned table, the creature would flow around them without causing harm. Its form would shift and part, creating safe passages for innocents to escape while continuing its hunt for the raiders. More importantly, throughout the entire encounter, part of Nabi remained connected to Yuna. A thin tendril of shadow stretched back to their quarters, pulsing gently against her hand. Hyunwoo realized the creature was monitoring her emotional state even while engaged in what could only be described as systematic extermination of the boarding party. When Yuna grew frightened by a particularly loud crash from the corridor outside, Nabi's hunting immediately became more aggressive. When she calmed down, touching the shadow tendril for comfort, the creature's actions became more controlled and precise. The entire encounter lasted less than 20 minutes. When the emergency lights finally switched back to normal illumination, the station was quiet except for the hum of life support systems. No more weapons fire, no more screaming, just silence. Nabi flowed back through the wall, resuming his normal size and settling beside Yuna like nothing had happened. But Hyunwoo could see the difference now. The gentle companion who arranged scattered documents and sang during prayer time was also something that could hunt trained killers through multiple dimensions simultaneously. "Is it over?" he asked. Yuna nodded, running her hand along what might have been Nabi's head. "He is. Satisfied, the threat is gone." Commander Lee's voice crackled over the intercom. "All clear. Threat neutralized. Repeat, all clear." Hyunwoo looked at Nabi, who was already returning to his usual peaceful demeanor, the lights within his form shifting back to their gentle patterns. "How many raiders were there?" 15, Yuna said quietly. "There are none now. The days following the raider attack were strange ones on Nexus Station. Word had spread quickly about what happened, though the official reports were heavily censored. Most people knew only that the boarding party had been neutralized and that somehow the station's most feared resident had been involved. The looks Yuna received now were different. Less fear, more a kind of awed terror, like people staring at a natural disaster from what they hoped was a safe distance. Hyunwoo found himself spending more and more time in her quarters. Officially, he was there to continue the trade negotiations, but the truth was more complicated. After witnessing what Nabi could do, he should have been terrified. Instead, he felt more curious than ever about the bond between Yuna and her companion. It was during one of their afternoon work sessions that Yuna finally decided to tell him the whole story. She had been quieter than usual, occasionally glancing at him as if trying to make some kind of decision. Nabi seemed to sense her mood, settling closer to her than normal and making soft humming sounds that Hyunwoo had learned meant the creature. I was trying to comfort her. "You have questions," she said finally, setting down the data pad she'd been pretending to read, "about what happened during the attack, about what Nabi truly is." Hyunwoo nodded. "I've been trying to understand how you two are connected. It's obviously more than just having a pet or a companion animal." Yuna was quiet for a long moment, running her fingers through what might have been Nabi's fur, though it looked more like she was touching liquid starlight. "My people have a word for it," she said. "Velthara. In your language, the closest translation would be soul bonding, but even that doesn't capture the true meaning." She stood up and walked to the small window that looked out at the stars. Nabi flowed along beside her, never more than an arm's length away. "It is not something we choose or create. It simply happens, perhaps once in 1,000 generations. A child is born, and somewhere in the spaces between dimensions, a being, like Nabi, feels that birth and comes searching." "How old were you?" Hyunwoo asked. 6 years old by your counting," Yuna said, smiling at the memory. "I was playing in my family's garden when I saw something moving in the shadows between the crystal trees. My parents were terrified when they found me talking to what looked like living darkness. They thought I was going to be devoured." Nabi made a sound that might have been laughter, if creatures from other dimensions could laugh. Yuna reached out and touched what might have been his head. "But instead of fear, I felt completion," she continued, "like finding a part of myself that had been missing. From that moment, we have shared everything. When I am happy, he experiences joy. When I am sad, he grieves with me. When I dream, he dreams the same dreams." To demonstrate, Yuna closed her eyes and began thinking about something that obviously brought her pleasure. Immediately, colors began rippling through Nabi's form, soft blues and silvers that pulsed in rhythm with her breathing. When she opened her eyes and laughed at something only she knew, the colors brightened and began moving faster, like aurora dancing across a night sky. "It works both ways," she explained. "I can sense his emotions too, though they are different from ours. Deeper, more ancient. Sometimes I feel what he feels when he exists in spaces that have no physical reality, and it is both beautiful and terrifying." Hyunwoo watched this display with growing understanding. "That's why you knew about the raiders before the alarms went off. He sensed them coming." "He felt their intent to cause harm," Yuna confirmed. "To him, violent thoughts have a taste, I suppose you could say. He can detect them from great distances, across dimensions that most beings cannot even perceive." She turned from the window to look directly at him. "But you, Hyunwoo, you are different. From the moment Nabi first saw you, he felt something unexpected." "What do you mean?" Yuna exchanged a look with Nabi, some wordless communication passing between them. "May I show you something? It will not hurt, but it might be overwhelming." Hyunwoo nodded, though he wasn't sure what he was agreeing to. Yuna placed one hand on his shoulder and her other hand on Nabi. The creature extended what looked like a tendril of shadow toward Hyunwoo, stopping just short of touching him. "This will let you experience a small part of what our bond feels like," Yuna explained, "but only if you're willing." Hyunwoo looked at the tendril of living darkness hovering near his face. Every instinct should have been screaming at him to run. Instead, he felt that same strange sense of recognition he'd experienced during their first meeting. "Okay," he said. The moment Nabi's essence touched his forehead, Hyunwoo's consciousness exploded outward. For just an instant, he experienced existence from Nabi's perspective, reality stretched across multiple dimensions, emotions that had color and taste, the overwhelming protective love the creature felt for Yuna. But underneath all of that was something else. Something focused specifically on him, recognition. Not just familiarity, but actual recognition, as if Nabi had been searching for him without even knowing it. When the connection broke, Hyunwoo staggered backward, his mind reeling from what he'd experienced. Yuna steadied him, her purple eyes wide with amazement. "Now you understand," she said softly. "Nabi doesn't just tolerate you, He recognizes you as someone who could form the same kind of bond. It's why you feel no fear in his presence. Your soul resonates with his in a way that happens perhaps once in 10,000 years. Hyunwoo looked at Nabi, who was watching him intently with those impossible eyes. You mean we could be bonded like you two are? It's possible, Yuna said, though her voice carried a note of uncertainty. But it would change you forever. You would no longer be entirely human. Part of you would exist in the spaces between dimensions, just as part of Nabi exists here with us. The implications of what she was saying hit him like a physical blow. To bond with Nabi would mean leaving behind everything he understood about himself and reality. But looking at the connection between Yuna and her companion, seeing the absolute trust and love they shared, he began to understand why some people might consider it worth the price. The emergency council meeting was called 3 days after the Raider incident. Hyunwoo sat in the back of the conference room, watching as holographic projections of various alien dignitaries flickered to life around the central table. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and he had a sinking feeling he knew what this was about. Admiral Park, a stern woman with silver hair and decades of command experience, stood at the head of the table. Her expression was grim as she activated a series of classified files that filled the air above them. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We need to discuss the security implications of recent events aboard this station. The holographic representatives murmured among themselves in various languages. Hyunwoo recognized delegates from the major trading worlds, Altair Prime, the Centauri colonies. Even the normally reclusive Andromedan Collective had sent a representative. The entity known as Nabi has been reclassified, Admiral Park continued, pulling up tactical assessments that made Hyunwoo's blood run cold. Military intelligence now designates it as a Class 12 existential threat, the highest classification in our system. For comparison, a supernova rates as Class 10, the Altarian. Ambassador, a tall being with crystalline features, spoke first. Admiral, with respect, we've tolerated this creature's presence for weeks now. But what happened during the Raider attack? His voice trailed off as security footage played, showing shadowy forms flowing through solid walls. 15 armed raiders, the Admiral said flatly. Eliminated in under 20 minutes, no traces remained. Our forensics teams found weapons scattered in corridors with no bodies, no blood. Nothing to indicate what happened to the attackers themselves. The Centauri delegate, a woman with pale blue skin, leaned forward. The psychological impact on station personnel has been severe. Half my diplomatic staff have requested immediate transfer. The other half refused to leave their quarters without armed escort. Hyunwoo felt his stomach tighten as he realized where this was heading. Around the table, representative after representative spoke up with similar concerns. Fear, panic, demands for action. The Galactic Council has reached a decision, announced the Andromedan representative, her voice artificially modulated through her translation device. The Velnari delegate and her companion must be relocated immediately to a quarantine facility. Admiral Park nodded grimly. Kepler 442c has been designated as the relocation site. It's a habitable world with no indigenous population and limited access routes. The delegate will be provided with adequate housing and supplies, but will be restricted from leaving the planet or receiving visitors without council approval. That's exile, Hyunwoo said, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. Every head in the room turned toward him, and he realized he'd just spoken, out of turn in a high-level diplomatic meeting. Admiral Park's eyes narrowed. Lieutenant Kim, you're here as an observer. This decision has already been made. But it's not fair, Hyunwoo pressed on, knowing he was probably ending his career, but unable to stop himself. Yuna hasn't done anything wrong. She's been nothing but cooperative with our negotiations, and Nabi only acted to protect the station from raiders who were trying to kill innocent people. The Altarian ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter. Lieutenant, that creature eliminated 15 trained soldiers in minutes. It exists partially outside our reality. How exactly do you propose we contain something like that if it decides we're a threat? You don't understand, Hyunwoo said. standing up despite Admiral Park's warning glare. "Nabi isn't dangerous unless something threatens Yuna. He's protective, not aggressive. There's a difference." "The decision is final," Admiral Park said coldly. "The transport will arrive in 48 hours. Lieutenant Kim, report to my office after this meeting." As the holograms flickered out one by one, Hyun-woo felt a crushing weight settle on his chest. He'd failed. All his time working with Yuna, all the progress they'd made in understanding each other, and it was all being thrown away because people were too afraid to see past their own terror. When he reached Yuna's quarters later that evening, he found her sitting on the floor in the center of the room, staring out at the stars through her small window. Nabi was coiled around her, but his form was agitated, constantly shifting and writhing with harsh red lights pulsing through his darkness like warning signals. "You heard?" she said without looking at him. "I'm sorry," Hyun-woo said, feeling helpless. "I tried to speak up during the meeting, but they wouldn't listen." Yuna nodded slowly. "I felt their fear through the station's walls. Their terror reaches Nabi even when they're not in the same room. It causes him distress, which causes me distress, which makes his condition worse. A cycle that feeds on itself." Hyun-woo sat down across from her, noting how Nabi's agitation seemed to calm slightly when he was near. "What will you do on Kepler 442c? "Exist," Yuna said simply. "It is what I have always done. Move from place to place, never staying long enough for people to become comfortable with us, never connecting with anyone because the fear always wins in the end." For the first time since he'd known her, Yuna looked truly defeated. Her shoulders sagged under an invisible weight, and her purple eyes held a sadness that seemed bottomless. "I had hoped," she continued quietly, "that perhaps this time would be different. When you showed no fear, when you brought gifts to Nabi, when you treated us like normal beings deserving of friendship. I allowed myself to hope that maybe isolation wasn't my only option." Nabi made a sound like wind through empty spaces, and colors flickered through his form. Not the bright, happy colors Hyun-woo had learned to associate with Yuna's contentment, but muted gray shades that spoke of grief and resignation. "The most powerful being I know," Yuna said, reaching out to touch her companion, "and he cannot protect me from loneliness, cannot shield me from the knowledge that everywhere we go, we are unwanted. That is a kind of pain that exists in dimensions he cannot reach." Admiral Park's final words echoed in Hyun-woo's mind. "Maintain professional distance, follow orders, don't get emotionally involved." But looking at Yuna's defeated expression and Nabi's distressed writhing, he realized those orders had come far, too late. He was already involved, more deeply than he'd ever intended to be. The transport would arrive in less than 2 days, and then they would be gone forever, exiled to a distant world where their only company would be each other and the vast emptiness of space, unless someone found a way to change the Council's mind, or unless someone decided that some things were more important than following orders. That night, Hyun-woo couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Yuna had said, how she'd hoped things might be different this time, only to face the same rejection and exile she'd experienced her entire adult life. There had to be a reason why he was different, why he could stand in Nabi's presence without feeling the terror that drove everyone else away. He spent hours in the station's research library, digging through xenopsychology databases and evolutionary biology reports. Most of the information was dry academic material, but slowly a pattern began to emerge that made him sit up straighter in his chair. The next evening, he found Yuna in her quarters, packing her few belongings into a simple travel case. The transport would arrive tomorrow, and she was preparing for another exile with the quiet resignation of someone who had done this many times before. Nabi hovered nearby, his form subdued and the lights within his darkness dim with shared sadness. "I found something," Hyun-woo said, setting his datapad on her table. "Something that might explain why I'm not afraid of Nabi." Yuna looked up from her packing, curiosity flickering in her purple eyes. "What do you mean?" Hyun-woo activated the datapad, showing her charts and graphs that compared the evolutionary history of different species. "I've been researching fear responses across various intelligent races. Look at this. The Altarians evolved on a world with no major predators. The Centauri developed intelligence while living in underground cities, protected from surface dangers. Most spacefaring species had similar evolutionary paths. He swiped to the next screen, showing Earth's violent history. But humans are different. We evolved alongside apex predators, creatures that could kill us easily. Saber-toothed cats, cave bears, giant wolves. For millions of years, the most dangerous things on our planet were living right next to us. Yuna sat down across from him, genuinely interested now. And this affected how your minds developed? Exactly, Hyunwoo said, pulling up brain scan. Comparisons. Other species developed what psychologists call pure fear responses to unknown threats. When they encounter something potentially dangerous, their instinct is to flee immediately. But humans developed something called threat assessment behavior. He showed her footage of early humans interacting with wolves, one of their planet's most dangerous predators. Instead of just running away, our ancestors learned to evaluate threats. They could tell the difference between a wolf that was hunting and one that was curious. Some of them even figured out how to turn those dangerous predators into allies. Dogs, Yuna said, understanding beginning to dawn in her expression. Dogs, Hyunwoo confirmed. We took one of the most efficient killing machines on our planet and turned them into companions. Not by making them less dangerous, but by forming partnerships with their dangerous nature. We have thousands of years of evolutionary programming that tells us to look for intelligence and intention in predators, rather than just running away. Nabi seemed to be listening to their conversation, his form becoming more active as Hyunwoo spoke. The creature drifted closer, those impossible eyes focusing on the datapad's display. But Nabi is far more dangerous than any Earth predator, Yuna pointed out. That's true, Hyunwoo admitted, but the principle is the same. When other species look at him, they see pure threat, something so dangerous that their only option is to flee. When I look at him, my human brain automatically starts trying to figure out what he wants, what he's thinking, whether he's friendly or hostile. He gestured toward Nabi, who had settled beside Yuna like a contented pet. And everything about his behavior around you signals protective companion, not mindless monster. He arranges your papers. He dims his lights during prayers. He brings you gifts. Those are social behaviors that my ancestors would have recognized in wolf packs or early dogs. Yuna was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. So you're saying that humans are naturally better at befriending dangerous creatures? I'm saying we're the only species that evolved to try, Hyunwoo replied. Everyone else developed instincts that tell them to run from anything that might be a threat. Humans developed instincts that tell us to figure out if that threat might actually be a friend. To demonstrate his point, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small crystal he'd been saving, a piece of compressed starlight that he'd bought from a trader. He offered it to Nabi, who examined it carefully before accepting the gift, his form shimmering with pleased colors. See, Hyunwoo said. Gift exchange, social bonding, recognition of non-hostile intent. Any human who grew up with pets would recognize these behaviors, even in something as alien as Nabi. Yuna watched this interaction with growing amazement. You make it sound so simple. It is simple, Hyunwoo said. It's just that no other species has the evolutionary background to see it. They look at Nabi and see a cosmic horror. I look at him and see a very large, very unusual dog who's devoted to his human. For the first time in days, Yuna laughed, a genuine sound of delight that made colors ripple through Nabi's form like aurora. A dog? The most loyal, protective dog in the galaxy, Hyunwoo said with a grin. One that happens to exist in multiple dimensions and can phase through solid matter, but still fundamentally a dog. Nabi made a sound that might have been indignation, but the playful lights dancing through his darkness suggested he wasn't actually offended by the comparison. This research, Yuna said, growing serious again. Could it help others understand? Could it change how people see us? Hyunwoo nodded. That's what I'm hoping. If I can present this to the council, show them that human-Nabi interactions follow predictable patterns based on evolutionary psychology, maybe they'll reconsider the exile order. For the first time since the council's decision, hope flickered. in Yuna's eyes. "Do you really think it could work?" "I think it's worth trying," Hyunwoo said, "because if I'm right, you and Nabi might not have to spend the rest of your lives alone on some distant planet. There might be a way for you to find acceptance, at least among humans." Yuna reached out and took his hand, her touch warm despite her alien heritage. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing us as more than monsters, for giving me hope when I thought I had none left." Nabi settled around both of them, his form calm and content for the first time since the council's announcement. In that moment, sitting together in the quiet of her quarters, they felt less like three separate beings and more like a small family facing an uncertain future with shared determination. The council meeting where Hyunwoo presented his research lasted 3 hours and ended in complete failure. Despite his carefully prepared arguments about human evolutionary psychology and threat assessment behavior, despite the charts and data proving that humans could safely interact with beings like Nabi, the representatives remained unmoved. Fear, he learned, was stronger than logic. "Your theories are interesting, Lieutenant," the Altarian ambassador had said dismissively, "but we cannot risk the safety of billions based on one human's unusual reaction to a cosmic horror." The transport would arrive in 6 hours. Yuna's exile was now inevitable. Hyunwoo sat in his quarters, staring at the official transfer request form on his desk. It was blank except for his name at the top, waiting for him to fill in his destination. He could request assignment to any human colony, any Earthship anywhere in known space. His military career was still intact, his record unmarked by his association with the station's most feared resident. All he had to do was sign it and walk away. But every time he picked up the stylus, he thought about Yuna sitting alone in her quarters, preparing for a lifetime of isolation on a distant world. He thought about Nabi, who had shown him nothing but gentle curiosity and protective loyalty, being branded as an existential threat for the rest of existence. A soft chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. When it opened, he was surprised to see Admiral Park standing in the corridor, looking older and more tired than he'd ever seen her. "May I come in, Lieutenant?" she asked quietly. "Of course, Admiral," Hyunwoo said, gesturing to the small chair by his desk. She sat down heavily and noticed the blank transfer form, having trouble deciding where to go next. "Something like that," Hyunwoo admitted. Admiral Park was quiet, for a moment studying his face. "I've been in command for 37 years, she said finally. "I've made thousands of decisions, some of them sending people to their deaths. But this one," she shook her head, "this one doesn't sit right with me." "Then why not override the Council's decision?" "Because I don't have that authority," she replied. "The best I can do is offer you some unofficial advice. Whatever you decide to do in the next few hours, make sure you can live with it for the rest of your life." After she left, Hyunwoo knew his decision was made. He crumpled up the transfer form and walked toward the diplomatic quarters for what might be the last time. He found Yuna and Nabi in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars through the large viewing window. The transport ship was already visible in the distance, growing larger as it approached the station. Yuna's packed belongings sat beside her, a single small case containing everything she owned. "I'm coming with you," Hyunwoo said without preamble. Yuna turned around, her purple eyes wide with shock. "What?" "To Kepler 442c. I'm requesting transfer to the quarantine world." He sat down beside her, looking out at the approaching transport. "I've already submitted the paperwork." "You cannot," Yuna protested. "Your career, your life among your own people, you would give up everything?" "I would gain something more important," Hyunwoo replied. "The chance to prove that humans and beings like Nabi can coexist. The chance to show the galaxy that fear doesn't have to win." Tears began flowing down Yuna's cheeks, the first time he'd ever seen her cry. "But you would be trapped there with, thus cut off from your world, your family." "I'd be with friends," Hyunwoo said simply. "That's enough." Nabi had been silent during this exchange, but now the creature moved closer to them both. His form began to change, becoming more solid and defined than Hyunwoo had ever seen it. The lights within his darkness pulsed in a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. "He wants to show you something," Yuna said. wiping her eyes. Something. He has never shared with anyone except me. What do you mean? Instead of answering, Yuna placed one hand on Hyunwoo's shoulder and her other hand on Nabi. The creature extended what looked like a tendril of living starlight toward Hyunwoo's forehead. This will be different from before, Yuna warned. More. Complete. More permanent. Are you certain you want this? Hyunwoo looked at the tendril hovering inches from his face, knowing that touching it would change him forever. I'm certain. The moment Nabi's essence made contact with his consciousness, Hyunwoo's perception of reality exploded outward in all directions. He was suddenly experiencing existence from Nabi's perspective, not just the 3 dimensions of normal space, but layers upon layers of reality stacked like transparent sheets, each one containing its own version of truth. He felt the creature's ancient memories, eons of drifting through spaces between stars, searching for something without knowing what it was. The loneliness that came from being a unique being in an infinite universe. The joy of finding Yuna as a child and discovering that connection was possible after all. But underneath all of that was something else. A recognition that went deeper than memory or instinct. Looking at Hyunwoo through Nabi's senses, he saw himself not as a human, but as a pattern of energy and intention that resonated perfectly with the creature's own essence. A harmony that occurred perhaps once in the lifetime of galaxies. Most remarkably, he experienced love from Nabi's perspective, not the simple emotional attachment he understood as a human, but something that transcended physical form entirely. Love is a fundamental force of the universe, creating actual bridges between dimensions, binding souls across impossible distances and differences. In Nabi's reality, Yuna's soul appeared as a brilliant beacon of light that warmed the cosmic darkness around her, and now, incredibly, Hyunwoo's own essence was beginning to shine with the same warm radiance. The experience lasted only seconds in real time, but when it ended, Hyunwoo knew he had been fundamentally changed. He could still feel threads of connection stretching between himself, Yuna, and Nabi, bonds that existed in dimensions he was only beginning to perceive. Now you understand, Yuna said softly, why some connections are worth any sacrifice. Looking at her and Nabi, seeing the love that flowed between them like visible light, Hyunwoo nodded. The transport was almost at the docking bay now, ready to carry them all into exile. But for the first time since the Council's decision, he felt genuinely hopeful about their future. Some bonds, he realized, were stronger than fear, stronger than politics, stronger even than the vast distances between stars, and those bonds were worth fighting for no matter the cost. The resignation letter sat on Admiral Park's desk like a small bomb waiting to explode. Hyunwoo had submitted it at 600 hours, along with a formal request for civilian transport to Kepler 4142c. By 0800, word had spread through the station's command structure like wildfire, and by noon, emergency communications were flying between Nexus Station and diplomatic headquarters across 3 sectors. No human had ever voluntarily exiled themselves to live with a classified existential threat. Not once in the recorded history of interspecies relations. Hyunwoo spent the morning in his quarters, packing his few belongings while his personal communicator buzzed constantly with incoming messages. His parents on Earth, confused and frightened by the official notification they'd received. His former commanding officers, demanding explanations. His younger sister Min Jung, who simply sent a text that said, "Are you insane?" He answered none of them. Some decisions couldn't be explained through words, only through actions. At 1400 hours, Admiral Park's aide appeared at his door with a summons. When Hyunwoo arrived at her office, he found not just the Admiral but also Captain Jung-ho Kim from the Velnari diplomatic mission, appearing via hologram from the Centauri system. Both looked like they'd aged years in the past few hours. "Lieutenant," Admiral Park began without preamble, "I'm going to ask you one more time to reconsider this insanity. Do you understand what you're proposing to do?" "I'm proposing to relocate to Kepler 4142c as a civilian observer," Hyunwoo replied calmly. "The planet is habitable, and there are no regulations preventing voluntary settlement." Captain Kim leaned forward in his holographic projection. "Son, you're talking about permanent exile." Kepler 442c is designated as a quarantine world. No regular transport, no communication relays, no trade routes. Once you're there for life. And for what? Admiral Park added, her voice rising with frustration. To keep company with an alien and her pet monster? To throw away everything you've worked for? Everything you could become? Hyunwoo met their eyes steadily. To prove that coexistence is possible. To show that fear doesn't have to define how different species interact with each other. This isn't some noble experiment, Captain Kim said harshly. That creature killed 15 armed raiders without leaving so much as a stain on the walls. Military intelligence classifies it as capable of ending civilizations. You're volunteering to live on an isolated planet with something that could erase you from existence if it had a bad day. Nabi isn't a monster, Hyunwoo replied. He's protective of Yuna, nothing more. Everything he's done has been in defense of her or the station. He's never shown aggression toward anyone who wasn't an active threat. Admiral Park slammed her hand on the desk. That's not the point. The point is that you're abandoning your career, your species, your entire future for what? A diplomatic impossibility. For friendship, Hyunwoo said quietly. For the chance to build something new instead of just reinforcing old fears. Captain Kim's expression softened slightly. I understand the impulse, Lieutenant. I've seen your reports about working with the Velnari delegate. But think about what you're giving up. You have family on Earth, prospects for advancement, a whole life ahead of you among your own people. And I'm choosing to build a different life, Hyunwoo replied. One based on connection instead of separation. Admiral Park leaned back in, her chair studying his face. This is really about her, isn't it, the alien? You've developed feelings for her. Hyunwoo considered denying it, but realized there was no point. Yes, he said simply. I care about Yuna. I care about both of them. But this decision isn't just about personal attachment. It's about proving that humans can be better than our fears. Love doesn't make tactical decisions, Admiral Park said bluntly. No, Hyunwoo agreed, but it makes moral ones, and sometimes moral decisions are more important than tactical ones. Captain Kim exchanged a look with the Admiral. Son, I have to ask, has that creature done something to your mind, some kind of psychic influence or manipulation? Because what you're proposing goes against every instinct of self-preservation. My mind is my own, Hyunwoo assured them. But my perspective has changed. I've seen what Nabi really is beyond the fear and the classifications. He's not a weapon or a threat. He's a being capable of love and loyalty, just expressed in ways we don't understand. The meeting continued for another hour, but Hyunwoo's resolve never wavered. When it became clear that nothing would change, his mind, Admiral Park dismissed him with a final warning. Once that transport leaves, there's no coming back, she said. No rescue missions, no emergency evacuations, no second chances. You'll be truly alone out there. I won't be alone, Hyunwoo replied. I'll be with friends. Word of his decision spread through the station like a shockwave. Crew members who had barely spoken to him before stopped him in corridors to ask if the rumors were true. Some looked at him like he was a hero, others like he was completely insane. A few seemed to understand something they couldn't quite put into words. When he reached Yuna's quarters that evening, he found her sitting by the window, tears streaming down her face. The moment she saw him, she stood up and threw her arms around him. You cannot do this, she whispered against his shoulder. I cannot let you sacrifice everything for us. It's not a sacrifice, Hyunwoo said, holding her close. It's a choice. The first real choice I've made in my entire adult life. Nabi flowed around both of them, his form brighter and more active than Hyunwoo had ever seen it. Colors rippled through the creature's essence. Not the muted tones of sadness they'd become accustomed to, but brilliant shades that spoke of joy and gratitude. And then something unprecedented happened. As Yuna's emotions peaked, as her gratitude and wonder at Hyunwoo's sacrifice overwhelmed her, Nabi began to change. The oppressive aura that had terrified every other being on the station for months started to fade, replaced by something that felt almost welcoming. Within minutes, station personnel began gathering outside Yuna's quarters, not fleeing in terror as they always had before, but drawn by curiosity and a strange sense that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time since Nabi's arrival, people could stand in his presence without feeling the bone-deep fear that had defined every previous encounter. Through the observation window, Hyun-woo watched as crew members from a dozen different species approached cautiously but without panic. Children who had hidden whenever Yuna walked past now peeked around their parents' legs with normal childhood curiosity rather than primal terror. "How?" Yuna whispered, staring at the crowd gathering peacefully outside her quarters. "Love," Hyun-woo said, understanding flooding through him. "Your emotional state affects his projections. When you feel acceptance and joy instead of isolation and sadness, he reflects that. He's not choosing to terrify people, he's responding to your emotional pain." For the first time in her adult life, Yuna was seeing what she had always dreamed of: beings from across the galaxy looking at her and Nabi without fear, approaching with curiosity instead of terror. And it was all because one human had chosen love over fear, connection over safety. The transport would arrive in 2 hours, but for the first time since the exile order was issued, none of them were thinking about departure. They were thinking about possibilities. The transport ship New Horizon wasn't designed for passenger comfort. Built primarily for cargo runs to remote colonies, it had been hastily modified with basic living quarters for the journey to Kepler 442c. As Hyun-woo walked through its narrow corridors, he couldn't help but think how different this was from the sleek military vessels he was used to. But he wasn't traveling alone. The news of Nabi's transformation, his ability to suppress his fear-inducing presence when Yuna was happy, had spread through the diplomatic networks faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the incident at the station, volunteers had begun stepping forward. Not many, but enough to matter. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a xenobiologist from Mars who had spent her career studying interdimensional phenomena, was the first to request passage. If that creature can exist in multiple realities simultaneously, she had told the transport captain, studying him could revolutionize our understanding of physics itself. Next came Jin-woo Park, a young anthropologist who specialized in first contact protocols. His request had been simple. Someone needs to document this. If humans and beings like Nabi can truly coexist, the galaxy needs to know how it works. There were others. A communications specialist interested in non-verbal alien contact, a terraforming engineer curious about adapting human settlements to accommodate interdimensional beings, even an artist who wanted to capture Nabi's unique beauty in ways that others could understand and appreciate. Not a large group, only 12 humans total, but enough to establish what they were already calling the Kepler colony. The first intentional settlement, designed around human-alien cooperation rather than human dominance. Hyun-woo found Yuna and Nabi in the ship's small observation lounge, looking out at the stars through the reinforced viewing window. The transport had left Nexus Station 6 hours ago, and they were already far from any inhabited system, traveling through the empty space between civilizations. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. Yuna shook, her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "For the first time in my life, I am not running away from something. I am running towards something instead." Nabi flowed around both of them, his form more relaxed than Hyun-woo had ever seen it. The creature had been changing ever since they boarded the transport, becoming less like a writhing mass of shadow and more like something that might almost be called beautiful. The harsh edges of his darkness had softened, and the lights within. His form now moved in gentle, hypnotic patterns that reminded Hyun-woo of Aurora, dancing across a night sky. "Look," Yuna said, pointing toward the corner of the lounge where several other passengers had gathered. Dr. Vasquez was sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding some kind of scanning device, while Nabi allowed tendrils of his essence to flow past the sensors. Instead of showing fear or revulsion, she was talking excitedly into her recorder about unprecedented energy readings and stable dimensional interfaces. Jin-woo sat nearby, sketching frantically in a digital notebook while asking Yuna questions about Velnari bonding rituals. The artist, a woman named Sujin, had set up a portable easel and was attempting to capture the way light moved through Nabi's form. her face lit up with creative inspiration rather than terror. "They are not afraid," Yuna observed with wonder, in her voice. "They're scientists and artists," Yunwoo replied. "Fear is the enemy of discovery. They see Nabi as a mystery to be understood, not a threat to be avoided." As if responding to their conversation, Nabi began to play. There was no other word for it. The creature started phasing in and out of visible reality, creating cascading patterns of light and shadow that filled the observation lounge with an almost musical rhythm. Colors that had no names rippled through his form, while parts of him existed in dimensions the human eye couldn't quite process, creating an effect that was breathtaking rather than terrifying. The other passengers gathered around, watching in amazement as Nabi performed what could only be described as a dance of joy. Some pulled out recording devices, others simply stared in wonder, but none showed the panic response that had defined every previous encounter between Nabi and non-bonded beings. "It's like he's finally free to be himself," Yunwoo murmured. "He is," Yuna confirmed. "For so long my sadness and isolation affected his projections. When I felt like a monster, he appeared monstrous. But now," she gestured toward the light show surrounding them, "now I feel accepted, loved, hopeful." And he reflects that instead. Captain Seo-jun, a gruff man who had initially been nervous about transporting what the military classified as an existential threat, appeared in the doorway. He watched Nabi's display for several minutes before approaching Hyunwoo. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. When they told me I'd be carrying that thing to Kepler 442c, I thought this was going to be the worst assignment of my career. But watching this," he shook his head in amazement, "I've been flying for 30 years and I've never seen anything so beautiful." 3 days later, as the New Horizon prepared to drop out of hyperspace at their destination, Hyunwoo stood with Yuna at the observation deck, watching the swirling colors of faster-than-light travel. Nabi surrounded them both, his form wrapped gently around them like a living blanket of starlight. "Are you ready?" Yuna asked, squeezing his hand. Hyunwoo looked around the lounge at their fellow colonists, humans who had voluntarily exiled themselves to prove that fear didn't have to define interspecies relations. Dr. Vasquez was still taking readings. Jinwoo was interviewing other passengers about their motivations, and Soo-jin had filled her sketchbook with drawings of Nabi that made him look like a guardian spirit rather than a cosmic horror. "I think we're about to build something the galaxy has never seen before," he said. "A place where beings like Nabi aren't classified as threats, but welcomed as friends, where love and curiosity matter more than fear and suspicion." The ship's intercom crackled to life. "All passengers, prepare for hyperspace exit. Kepler 442c in sight." Through the viewing window, a blue-green world appeared against the backdrop of stars, their new home, isolated from the rest of the galaxy, but full of possibilities. As they watched their destination grow larger, Nabi began to sing, not the distant, haunting melody they were used to, but something triumphant and hopeful. "A new beginning," Yuna whispered. "For all of us," Hyunwoo agreed, feeling the truth of it in his bones. They weren't just 3 beings traveling to exile. They were the founders of something unprecedented, a community built on the radical idea that love could bridge any gap, even the space between dimensions. As the New Horizon entered orbit, around their new world, Hyunwoo realized that sometimes the best journeys were the ones that took you further from where you started than you ever imagined possible. And sometimes the most important discoveries happened not when you conquered your fears, but when you chose to see past them to the wonders waiting beyond.